are some important things that I like to say are basic laws of coaching. And some of them I've gotten white, I think that are of most importance. The others you can just kind of read through. Each runner is an individual. When I coach a team, first day at college, I tell my entire team, you are all individual people, number one. Number two, you are a student at this university. And number three, you are a runner. And don't ever rearrange that order of importance. You're a student before you're a runner when you're in college, and you're a person before you're a student. So keep that straight. Everyone has good days and bad days. I don't care if you're a world record holder or Olympic champion, you can have a bad day now and then. You should have intermediate and long-term goals. And some of the goals, most of the goals aren't time goals or winning goals. Your goal for this race might be, today I'm going to try going out with the leaders and see how well I can hang on. And you might die and run a terrible race, but you accomplish your goal. It's easy to accomplish those kind of goals. Or today I'm going to go out at the back of the pack. My goal is to pass at least 40 people in this race. That might be my goal, and you might run a good or a bad race still. But you can't always go into every race imagining you're going to win or you're imagining you're going to do that. I always get excited about thinking about most high school runners in cross country. Here's how the race goes. The fastest guy or girl goes out too fast and dies, but wins because everybody else went with them and died worse. Really? No, that's how high school races go in cross country. How are you going to judge that even? You know, the best guy won, and then he assumes that's the way to run the race because he won. I guess the way to run these things is to go out real hard. Drag everybody else with me so they die. I always remember the one year at Cortland when I had the women's team at Nationals, and I'm a fanatic about going out slow in cross-country races. Now, older people can do that. The young high school kids have a hard time because if they go out slow and they look up and see 150 people in front of them, they quit before the race is into the half-mile mark. I had my women, I said, I want you to run the first 484 or 85, no faster. And I measured it off, and they had to do that as part of their warm-up. They had to run it. When the race went off, they went through 84, and they were the last 7 runners in the field of 185. By the mile mark, one of them had the lead, and she won by 20 seconds. And I had 5th, 8th, 15th, and 23rd. They walked off with the team championship. And they were the last 7 runners at the first 400. But you gotta, if you're gonna try that, you've got to practice it in smaller meets before it gets so important. The more important each meet gets, the faster they go out. The same people. The exact same people in a little dual meet will go out too fast. Then it becomes a sectional meet and they'll go out faster. Then it'll become a regional meet and it goes out, and then it becomes a national meet and they go out faster yet, and it's the same people. They just keep going faster and faster. Be available to your most, and this is what we've been talking about here, most mistakes are made early in races, particularly a marathon. Go out too fast and you know you're in trouble. And when you run together, I like to say run together. If you got 5 people going out for a run, you don't need a lead dog. And that happens so often. This person's got to be in front. Somebody else comes up to run with him, he picks it up so he stays in front all the time. That's not fun. Even if you have to tell your runners, okay, I want to lead the first mile and you lead the second mile. You've got to do something. You can't have fights going on about who's got to be in the lead. Rest is part of training. It is not avoiding training. You've got to have adequate rest for anything you do. Find positive comments to say. If one of my runners come to me after a race and said, or after a workout and said, man, I felt terrible today, the worst thing I can say is, yeah, and you looked awful too. I mean, come on. Think of something. Maybe you say, I'm sorry you didn't feel good on workout, but you know, you were carrying your arms down a little lower like we've been talking about, and they looked more relaxed, and that was good. You know, find something good to say. You don't need to back up what their terrible feelings are. Do not train when you're injured or sick. All you're going to do is prolong it. You can't do that. Encourage good food or good nutrition and sleep. Training should always be rewarding. I used to say training should be fun, but it's not always fun. But it should be rewarding. Even if you hurt after a good workout, you ought to be able to think back, yeah, I really benefited today. Consistency is the single most important word in all of life, I guess. Consistency applies to food, consistency applies to rest, consistency applies to training. Anybody can go out and do one great workout and that's it. But to do it with regular consistency, that's what counts. That is really the key to success. Focus on the task at hand. And I'll probably talk more about that than anything else. In fact, I'll tell you a good story about that. When I coached down in Peru, I lived in Lima. They had the national championships in Lima. And one of the kids, who was about an 18, 19-year-old young native kid from up in the mountains, he lived at 13,000 feet up by Lake Titicaca on the Bolivian border. He was running in the 5,000. I'd only been there about 3 or 4 weeks when this took place, and my Spanish was about 0 at that time. And in the 5,000 meter race, this guy was in 5th place with 5 laps to go. And the 4 people who were ahead of him were running as a pack about 60 meters in front of him. And he came by me, I was standing by the finish line, and he said something in Spanish, and I didn't know what he said. And I asked this guy, I said, what did he say? He said he asked if he could drop out of the race. I thought it was nice that he asked instead of just dropping out. So, kind of as a joke, I said, when he comes by with 4 laps to go, you tell him it's just fine with me if he drops out of the race if he first catches the leaders. And he took me at my word. And he went after him. It took him 3 laps to catch him. By the time he caught him, there was less than a lap left. He figured, I might as well win this thing, and he did. He was national champion. Because he had something to focus on. When he came by asking about dropping out, all he was thinking, God, 4 guys are killing me. I'm feeling horrible. I got 5 laps to go. Everything was negative, negative, negative. And I just said, you catch them, you can quit. No problem. That's what he wants to do now. I want to quit this thing, and what do I have to do to get out of this and just catch those guys? And the reason it worked, I'm sure, is because he was from such high altitude, and he didn't know how much better he could run at sea level. He was probably running at his typical altitude pace, and when he tried to pick it up, it was no problem. So you never know. Focus on the task at hand. That's what he did. You focus on the task. People definitely progress at different rates. When I used to coach in college, I would always tell my runners, freshmen coming in, see if you can make a 5 or a 10% improvement over the next 4 years. Maybe you won't make any your first year. Maybe you'll make 5% of your 10% in the first year. But don't think I have to make a certain amount every year. Some people progress very rapidly, and if one of your friends who's equal to you and you both do training and your friend gets quite a bit better than you, that doesn't mean they're better. Maybe it's just going to take you longer to get to where he got in a shorter time. People progress at different rates. Know the purpose of every workout. You better know that. And if you don't know the purpose of every workout, I would say go home and watch TV instead of working out. Because why are we doing this? You ought to be able to answer that question. Every workout that's ever done. Why are we doing this workout? What is the benefit of doing this workout? Here's the 4 ingredients of success. Inherent ability, motivation, opportunity, and direction. Inherent ability. It could be anatomical. You know, what's your body? How tall are you? How heavy are you? How muscular? And so on. It could be biomechanical. What are the advantages I got at joint angles and things, fulcrums? physiological, could be a cardiovascular system thing, or it could be psychological. These are different. I mean, just think, and not necessarily in running. How about basketball? And you're fully grown, you're 5'2" and weigh 106 pounds. You're not going to make it in basketball, I'm sorry. And that's an anatomical thing. You had no control over it. Your parents gave you that body. You're born with a certain body. You have no control over that whatsoever. And you might have the perfect looking body, but biomechanically it might not work too well. Your attachments across joints might be at a different angle. We just don't have the force to do this. So that's a very important characteristic. People have different abilities inherently. Now, the second one is motivation. And it has to be intrinsic motivation within you. Not how motivated are your parents for you, or not how motivated are your peers or your coach. No, how motivated are you to do something that you have ability to do? Now, there's only 4 kinds of people. When you take those first 2 ingredients of success, the ones that have great ability and are highly motivated to do that thing, they are champions. The ones who have great ability to do something but not motivated to do it are coach frustrators. The coach sees the ability, but this person doesn't want to do it. You're coaching over at a high school in a basketball, and a kid transfers in from another place, a junior, and he's 6'10", and he's light on his feet, and he can jump everywhere, and you're drooling over this guy, but he wants to be a concert pianist. He doesn't want to be a basketball player. He's not going to be a great basketball. He might be a pretty good one, just because of his physical ability, but he's not going to be a great one because he doesn't want to do it. Then you got the ones with little ability and highly motivated, and they're self-frustrators because they want to do something they don't have the ability to do. And in running, I would never kick one of them off my team. They're wonderful to have around because they'll do anything you ask of them. In fact, your job as a coach is to not have them overtrained, because they'll do anything you say plus ask for more because they want to do this so badly. But if they're not built to do it, you got to be careful not to let them get hurt. I was asked one time to write an article for a science journal on overtraining. I said, that's the simplest article I've ever written. It's 2 words long. Avoid it. Then you got the number 4 down here, people with little ability and low motivation, and they're no-show, so you don't have to worry about them. You'll never even deal with them. Here's the third opportunity, or opportunity is the third ingredient of success. And it could be weather or facilities or competition or equipment or what. I mean, let's say that you have tremendous ability and highly motivated to be a downhill skier, and you live in Miami, Florida. When are you going to practice? You can't. You gotta have the right weather to do some sports, not necessarily running. I mean, running, you can run anywhere. That's one of the nicest things about running. Is this good from weather standpoint, just about anywhere. Or facilities. And that could be as simple as people have an advantage, runners have an advantage in miserable weather that schools have an indoor track. Some do and some don't. That can be a big advantage. Or just equipment and facilities altogether, or competition. How often do you get to compete? Do you have enough money to go compete against some other people? That can be a big opportunity thing. Or equipment. What kind of equipment do you have? You know, and travel is the same thing as competition. Do you have opportunity to travel other places to compete? So these are all opportunity things. And then you've got direction. The fourth ingredient of success, direction. It could be the program you're following, or a teacher or a coach. And I think it's the least important of those 4 ingredients. And the reason I say that, I mean, it might be the most important one if you got a really good coach. But it's the only ingredient that can be negative. You've either got some ability or none. In fact, I think I have a picture of that right here. You've either got some ability or some degree of ability. Some motivation or a lot of motivation or no opportunity of that. Or in direction, you can have some, you can have good direction, or you can have direction that's worse than none. If somebody came up to me and said, will you train me for the marathon? My first question would be, how much running are you doing now? And if the answer was, I'm not running, how much running have you done in your life? I've never run. What sports have you done? I've never done any. You want to be a marathon runner? Starting this week, I want you to do 150 miles a week. That's stupid. That's worse than telling them nothing. They'd be better off just go out and jog around a little bit than have me tell them they got to run. And I've coached quite a few runners who run 150, 160 miles a week, but didn't do it the first day. Come on, some years we're talking about. So direction can be negative. I mean, it can be the most important really thing. If everything else is pretty good, then good direction is going to get you the job done. But you got to make sure it's good direction. Before we take a break, how do we coach? So how do we coach? Do we use the surviving egg theory? You all know that surviving egg theory of coaching? If you take a basket full of raw eggs and throw them against a brick wall, every once in a while one of them doesn't break. Yeah. Many coaches coach that way. We'll just pound y'all and hope somebody lives through it. Unfortunately, in this country, we tend to think highly of coaches who develop a runner, even though they kill 50 others on the way. You know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Or how about, what did my coach do to me? Maybe that's the way I should coach. You know, my coach, I told you I was in pentathlon. And I had never run before in my entire life when I had to start running in pentathlon. And we had a fencing master, outstanding fencing master from the Budapest Fencing Academy in Hungary. And to save money, they didn't have a running coach, so they asked the fencing master to also coach running. And he didn't have a clue. Here's what I did. The first 6 weeks of my entire running career, we jogged a mile on the track to warm up, a cinder track, put on spikes, ran 10 400s as hard as we could, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. I guess that's the way we're supposed to do it. That's what my coach did to me. All I know is I didn't know which foot to stand on. My shins hurt so bad. It was terrible. And now, I suppose I should tell you what we did for running when I was in pentathlon, or not running, but training. I don't think there's ever been a program that involved this much training, ever. In the saddle at 5:30 a.m. for 2 hours of horseback riding. We had to get there at 5 because we had to put the tack on the horse first. So in the saddle at 5:30 to 7:30. 7:30 to 8:30 was breakfast. 8:30 to 10:30 was fencing, including a 20-minute private lesson that you never even got to bring your arm down. 10:30 to 11 was driving to the swimming pool in San Antonio, Texas. The only 50-meter pool in town was at the Lone Star Brewery. We had to drive down to the brewery to swim every day. And then we swam from 11 to 12:30. No goggles, no earplugs in those days. And you come out of there, you couldn't even see. And so what event do we practice next? Shooting. You can't even see the target, let alone the sights. So we ate lunch from about 1 to 2, and we got a whole break from 2 to 3:30. We used to sleep in the fencing cell because it was the only air-conditioned place there was. And then 3:30 to 5 was shooting on an outdoor range in the miserable heat with no earplugs, and I have tinnitus to this day because of it. We used to shoot 200 or 300 rounds a day in an enclosed booth with no earplugs, 5 days, 6 days a week. For 2.5 years I did this. 2.5 years I did this program. And then we shot until 5 or 5:30. We got a second ride in or a second fence in and a dinner, and then we ran from 7:30 till 9 p.m. in the saddle at 5:30 the next morning for 2.5 years.
What happened to the horses?
The horses were fine. I love horses. I mean, I have more horses, and I'll probably give you one of my horse stories, but let me tell you, I can tell you, we used to hire horses, or hire them, we would buy them from the glue factory. Oh, God. And teach them to jump so we could ride them, because in pentathlon, you don't ride a horse that you know. You draw from lot. So we figured if I can ride any of these horses, I can ride anything I'll ever draw. And I remember we got this one from the glue factory, and his name was Sugarfoot. And I was the first person to ride him. Looked like a nice, pretty horse. I had him tied up to the fence while I was putting all the tack on, and I walked around in front of him, which I shouldn't have done, to straighten his bridle. It was off to one side, and I was straightening it, and he whacked me with a front foot right in the face. I had a horseshoe print just right there. I mean, I'm sure I was going back. I'm glad I didn't get my arm up, because it would have broken easily. And I was on the ground, and I got on him, and we won the competition. Because I trust horses. And if you trust a horse, they know it. They will know it. And if you don't trust them, they will know that too. They're unbelievable animals, and they're wonderful animals. Yeah, we had some great times riding. So that's all I did for training. But in about 2 or 3 months, you reach a peak of fitness that you're never going beyond, because you can't get better spending that much time training. And here I'm the worst runner, and when do I do the running? At 7:30 to 9 at night after I've done all the other 5 sports that hold it. That's stupid. I should have been running at 9 or 10 in the morning and swimming the last thing in the day. But we all had to do the same thing, whether we were a good runner or a good swimmer or whatever. I mean, we're in the Army. Yes, sir, we do whatever they say. So then I moved to Sweden, and I used to train once a week riding, once a week shooting, twice a week fencing, 5 times a week swimming, and I ran every day, and all my events got better, all of them. I was probably averaging 2 or 3 hours a day of training as opposed to 12 or whatever it was before. I calculated it out. We were spending about 6,000 calories a day in that stupid program. Oh. What do the champions do? Maybe that's the way we should train, huh? That's how we should coach. Well, let me give you a good example here. Here's a week in high school in 1964. On Sunday, this guy ran a 10-mile run in 65 minutes. Over here, I put the kilometers of the quality part of the running. And he only ran once on Sunday. The other 6 days, he ran an afternoon session after a 5-mile morning session. So Monday, he got a 2-mile in 9:55, 2 1-miles in 5:12, 3 800 in 2:28, 6 465, plus weights, by the way. Tuesday, 6 464, 10 140s and 18, which is about a 55 or so second 400 pace. 5 800 in 3 minutes, 5 times 200. That's to be a 200. Wednesday, 50 400s and 69. on a 3-minute send-off. That means starting one every 3 minutes. And then the next day, 18 800s. And then Friday, a mile, a 1200, a 800, a 600, a 400, and the next day, a race.
What happened on race day?
Jim Ryan.
Oh my God. Think about how much better.
That's Jim Ryan. I talk at Jim Ryan's running camps still, 3 of them a year. We've been friends since way back because he was at Kansas when I was at Oklahoma City University, so we knew each other back then. I'll tell you what, I don't think there's ever been a better runner in the world. How many of you know how quickly he broke 4 minutes in the mile? 18 weeks after the first day he ever ran. Now you tell me some African who's done that. 18 weeks after he first ran a step, he broke 4 minutes. His first run was his sophomore year in high school, and his junior year he broke 4 minutes. That's unbelievable. Talk about inherent ability. And he put up with this running. This is his program.
He's the egg that survived.
And I asked, Bob Timmons was his coach, and Timmons and I are very good friends because I was a swimmer and I coached the Oklahoma City Swim Club, and we were state champions in age group swimming. And Timmy coached Wichita Age Group Swim Club, and they were Kansas state champions. So we used to battle each other all the time. So I became a good friend with Bob Timmons, who was Jim Ryan's coach, way before I knew Ryan. And these are swim workouts.
Yeah.
You can see that.
Yeah.
5400s, that's like 5100s in the pool. That's all it is. And swimmers can do that kind of thing. And Timmy had been a swim coach when he started running coaching, and he didn't know what to do, so he just do what the swim coaches do. And I'll just change the amounts. And I asked him one time, I said, you got other guys on your high school team who did this workout? He said, yeah, I got 34 of them. He said, except one guy, he quit after 40. He said, I knew he was never going to be any good. No, that's the way he was. And I will never argue that this was bad for Jim Ryan. Might have been perfect for Jim Ryan, but was it perfect for anybody else? That's the question. You know, I mean, let's face it. Here's at this time that he did this workout, because he was a junior in high school. This was the year he broke 4 minutes. What's 800s and 2:45 say? That's a 9:30 or a 5:30 mile pace. He could go out for a 9-mile run at 5:30 pace. He doesn't have to break it up into 800s. You know, I mean, and how hard are... Maybe we should train this way. Another good friend of mine, Jerry Lindgren. I know some of you know Jerry. I probably got along better with Jerry Lindgren than most people because, number one, I wasn't a coach, I was a researcher, and he was honest with me about talking about things. He's kind of a strange guy to talk to. He had a very, very upsetting family. He was highly abused as a young kid, and I think he took it all out on his running. I asked Jerry once, what's the longest run you ever went on, Jerry? He said 66 miles. He said, I did that one quite a few times. He went to school at Pullman, Washington State, and he used to run from his dormitory in Pullman, Washington, over into a forest ranger station in Idaho and back. And I said, man, you must have drank a lot on that trip. He said, yeah, if the ranger was there, I got a drink.
Wow.
Most miles he ever ran in 1 week were 380. He averaged 300 for 6 weeks, and he averaged 240 miles a week 1 year. He held the American record, high school record in the 5,000 for about 30 or 35 years, till Rupp broke it by about a few tenths of a second. I guess that's how we should train, huh? Because he was great. Jerry Lindgren had to lead. This guy loved to lead races. Unbelievable. He ran for the U.S. in a dual meet with the Soviet Union in the LA Coliseum on a cinder track in the 10K. It was the year he graduated from high school, I think. And he had to lead, so he took the lead. And he heard this Soviet guy behind him grinding his spikes in the track. So he tried to pick it up to get away from him and kept hearing him. He picked it up and kept hearing him. He won by half a lap. It was his own spikes he heard in the track. No, I asked Jerry one time, I said, what's your record for a 400? He says, I don't know. He said, I ran 53 the first lap of a mile once. That's the fastest 400 I ever ran. He said, I don't know. And I saw him a few years later and asked him, did you ever break that 53? He said, yeah, I ran a 52 the last lap of a 5K. He still didn't know what he could run a 400. Interesting guy. Had one injury in his running career. Got hit by a car. Now, you can try this without getting hurt. And he could do it because he had the body to do it. He weighed about 124 pounds. He was about 5'7" or 5'8", little guy. Didn't hit the ground hard. So you can't treat everybody like everybody else just because they were good. And here's some of the basic principles of training. Number one, the body reacts to stress. You stress the body, you're going to get a reaction. If you all got up right now and ran around the block once, you would have a reaction to that. You'd have several reactions to it. You'd be breathing harder. Your heart would be beating faster. You might feel a little discomfort in some running muscles. And if you did that every day once, you would have that same reaction every day. But over time, if you kept doing that, you'd have a second reaction. And the second reaction would be that if you stressed that body by running a time around, the things that you stressed would get stronger. If you stress your heart, it gets stronger. Make it beat harder and it's like any muscle. You stress a muscle and it gets stronger. And your heart's a muscle. So that's a very basic principle of training, is that the body reacts to stress. And specificity is more important, because what are you stressing? Stressing running muscles? Or are you stressing, you don't become a better runner by bowling. You become a better bowler by bowling. You don't become a better swimmer by playing ping pong. You become a better swimmer by swimming. You got to stress the things that are involved in what you want to be good at. And you got to stress them in a way that it helps you become better. So specificity. Then the benefit that you achieve depends on the type of stress. There's different kinds of running you can do. I mean, you can run slowly and that stresses one system, or you can run really fast and that stresses a completely different system. So what is it that you're what type of stress are you trying to impose? And the type that you impose will determine what the benefit is. Obviously, if you practice running faster, you're going to learn to be a faster runner. But you're not going to learn to be a faster runner if all you do is jog around. So, and you're not going to be a great marathoner if all you do is sprint. So there are different types of stress that have to be participated in. There's a very important principle called ease of maintenance. And that principle basically says that it's easier to maintain a level of fitness than it is to achieve it in the first place. And a lot of that's mental. If you've been working to try to break 5 minutes in a mile and you do it, you know you can do it now, so it's not so hard to do it again. But we also follow that principle when we taper for a race. We back off on training with the idea we're going to actually run faster. Now, how can you run faster by backing off on training if you don't maintain some fitness? So maintenance of the ease of maintenance is a very important. It's very easy. Your body maintains fitness quite nicely. And if you're hurt or ill and miss training for a while, the worst thing you can do is say, well, I've missed, I got to train extra hard to make up for it. No way. Because you've maintained most of your fitness. Sure, if you were out for a month or two, you're going to have to back off a lot. But just missing a few days, or You know, I keep thinking back when I talked about the importance of consistency. And I always like to point out, when I talk to my runners before a race, I always tell them, I don't care if you sleep the night before the race. Because if you tell them, make sure you get 8 or 10 hours in, they lie there all night, well, am I going to get 10 hours of sleep in? And if you say, I don't care if you sleep at all, they go right to sleep. There's no problem at all. I knew a guy one time whose wife gave birth to their first baby at 5 a.m. He did not sleep 1 hour that night, and that afternoon he broke a world record. One bad day isn't going to hurt you. But if you're not getting sleep, every one good day is not going to help you. It's got to be consistent. You know, it's the same with nutrition. Having one great meal isn't going to do any good if all the rest of them are bad. But having one bad meal is not going to hurt you if all the rest of them are good. So it's consistency and ease of maintenance. Then let me go on to this rate of achievement. This is how you achieve different levels of fitness. Let's say that you're down here. You've never run. You're in terrible shape. There's death right there. You're a little bit above that, okay? And you're gonna start doing this workout up here. 3 times 1 mile at 8 minutes with 8-minute rest. So you're going to run a mile in 8 minutes, you're going to rest 8 minutes, you run another one in 8 minutes and rest 8 minutes and run a third one and do that 3 days a week. That's all you're going to do. That's your total training program. Well, if that's all you do, here's how you'll get benefited from it. You'll follow this kind of a curve. Some people call it the half-life of training, which means in 1 week you're about halfway there to where you're going. And in 2 weeks, you're about half of where you get in 1 week and where you're going. And in 3 weeks, you're about half of where you got in 2 weeks and where you're going. And in 4 weeks, you're about half of where you got in 3 weeks and where you're going. And in 6 weeks, you're about there. Now, that doesn't mean you may not get better after 6 weeks, but most of the physiological adjustments will take place in about that amount of time. In other words, maybe while that's going on, you're also losing some fat off your body and gradually getting a little bit leaner. Then you could continue getting better for a long, long time. But physiologically, if you don't have any unnecessary fat to lose or any changes like that, you're gonna be about as fit as you're gonna get by doing that workout. So you got to do something else, right? The neat thing about training for running is you got several things you can change. You can change the amount of running. Instead of 3 1-mile runs, we could start doing 4 or 5. Or we could leave that the same and change the speed at which we run them. Instead of 8-minute pace, we'll run them at 7:40s. Or we can leave those both the same and reduce the rest between them. Or we can leave all that the same and just do it more often. Do it 5 days a week instead of 3 days. So you've got an amount of work, you've got an intensity of work, you've got recovery time, except for a steady long run, there's no recovery. And then you've got how often you do it. Frequency. So you've got several things you can change. And I don't think you should change more than one at a time, quite honestly. I wouldn't say go from this to doing 5 of them at 7:30 with 5 minutes rest 5 days a week. I mean, you're asking for trouble now. Most often what we change first is the amount of work we do. Just people handle that better than most anything else. And usually, if they're beginners, the speed is just going to come up without even working on it. Usually, you'll feel better going a little faster. Here's another principle of training that, let's say you started way down here and you got better, then you increased the training and you went up to a new level, then you increased the training and you didn't get better. That principle is everyone has limits. And I'm not even saying that you would ever reach your absolute limit. But you can certainly reach seasonal limits. And college is the absolute perfect example of that. I mean, I've had kids on my team that had a class every day at 8 a.m. They went till 2, and 2 days a week they had a lab from 2 to 5. They don't even get to come to practice at 3 or 4 in the afternoon because they're in lab. And the very next semester, that same student may not have a class till 10 a.m. They got all morning to go for a morning run. They don't have any labs, they're done at 2 in the afternoon. Those are two completely different situations. And so I'm not saying that you reach an absolute limit. I'm saying you have limits based on life. What's going on in your life? And even out of school. I mean, the college is the most obvious one because you have no control over the coursework. But in regular life, you got jobs, you got families, you got things to take care of, and you have good times and bad times. And that affects how hard you can train or how much time you can train. So you have to stay within reason as whether this, and I would say that if I was at this level of fitness and I increased the training again and I didn't get any fitter, well, you might as well back off to this level of fitness that got me there in the first place. Why should I work harder to get the same thing that I got with less work? Now there's two other principles of training. The first one is the principle of diminishing return. That says that as your training intensity increases, the amount of training or the intensity of training, your fitness gets better. And it looks just like that other curve I showed you. If you've never run before, you don't have to train very hard to get quite a bit better. I'd have no research, I'd be willing to almost bet that running 20 miles a week, you'll run as fast, half as fast as you'll ever get, no matter how much harder you'll ever run. I don't think you have to run very much to achieve about half of your ability level. It's the fitter you get, the less benefit you get by training harder. That's all it says. I mean, how hard do you have to train to improve your marathon from 2:04 to 2:03? Pretty hard. 1 minute, to go 1 minute faster. What if your marathon time is 5 minutes or 5 hours? To improve to 4:59, 1 minute, how hard would you have to train? Probably wouldn't have to train any harder at all. Just do another one. So the fitter you are, the less benefit you get from training harder. And on the other way of talking about that is, the less fit you are, the more benefit you get from training not very hard. If you're in terrible shape, you're over here. You don't have to train very hard to get a whole lot better. Keep that in mind when you have an athlete who misses 4 or 6 weeks or something because of an injury or an illness. They don't need to go back into it and train extra hard to regain where they were. No, they don't have to train hard at all to get back where they were. Because you don't have to train hard to get fitness when you're in lousy shape. And if you get in lousy shape by missing a month or two, then don't train too hard. And you have this mirror image accelerating setback principle that says when you're not training very hard, not too many problems happen. And at some point, as you train harder, the chance of something going wrong starts accelerating. So these are kind of mirror images of each other. So for me, the ideal place to train is in this window here, where you have big benefits and not too many problems. Now that doesn't mean you can't get better, and you might have to venture out here for short periods of time, but you're not going to stay out there too much because maybe something's going to go wrong. And that's so individual. It's so individual. Just like our buddy Jerry Lindgren. He runs 240 miles a week for a year. 95% of all runners who did that would probably get hurt. But some of them don't. You know, it's an interesting business. Over the years, starting way back probably in the 1920s, the most important variable from lab tests relative to endurance athletes was VO2 max. I don't know if you all understand VO2 max or not. VO2, volume of oxygen, maximum. What's the maximum amount of oxygen you can consume when working as hard as you can in your particular sport. Now let's keep it straight. Everyone doesn't have a single VO2 max. You have a VO2 max associated with any particular activity you do. You'd have a different VO2 max swimming than you would VO2 max running or VO2 max cycling or VO2 max speed skating or whatever, cross-country skiing, because you're using different muscle groups. So your body has a VO2 max, but let's just stick with runners, and every runner has a VO2 max associated with running. What's the maximum amount of oxygen, the maximum volume of oxygen they can consume when working as hard as they can? And that is very important. It's very important. But it's not the only thing that's important. It used to be thought of that's the only thing. If you had a 80 VO2 max, and 80 means 80 milliliters of oxygen consumed per kilogram of body weight. So you have two kinds of way of measuring your VO2 max. One is absolute terms and one is relative terms. In absolute terms, if I collected, while you were running, if I collected your expired air when running as hard as you could, I would get so many liters of air, and I would analyze that air for what content, what percentage of it was oxygen, and I can calculate how much oxygen you consumed as your maximum amount. And it might, let's say it's 4,200 milliliters, 4.2 liters. 4,200 milliliters of oxygen is your absolute VO2 max. Okay? And if you weigh 60 kilograms, 4,200 divided by 60 says you have a relative VO2 max of 70 milliliters per kilogram. So you divide your absolute max by your body weight in kilograms and you get a relative max. Now, absolute max is more important in some sports, but relative max is more important in running. In running, relative max is important because you have to carry your body weight. But in rowing, you don't carry your body weight. So an absolute VO2 max is more important. In other words, how much energy can you consume? How much work can you do relative to pushing those paddles against the water? That's why all the paddlers in those 8 oars are 6'4" and weigh about 180 to 220 pounds, because they're big and they can generate they can do a lot of work. Whereas in running, if you're big, you better have a high absolute VO2 max so that dividing it by your big body weight is going to still be high. That's why, in fact, just to compare Jerry Lindgren and Jim Ryan, for example, both of them had a relative VO2 max over 80, which is really up there. And Lindgren's absolute max was only about 4,500 milliliters, and Ryan's was over 6 liters, over 6,000 milliliters. But you're dividing 6,000 by a much higher body weight, and they both came out with the same relative max. And the relative max is the one that counts in running, because you have to carry your own body, not do some other workout. Now, if Lindgren were to row against Ryan, Ryan kill him, because he had a much higher absolute capability. Yeah, well, my point was that we used to just measure max. Right. And this guy was one of my teammates in pentathlon. And he told me he got his max measured at 73, which was quite good for pentathletes. We're not runners. And my max at that time was 63. And I thought maybe he didn't get a good test done. I thought maybe it was in a bad lab that things weren't under control. So I tested him in my lab, and I got a 73. And mine was 63. And I said, but I always used to run as fast as he did. Sometimes he beat me, sometimes I beat him. We were really equal in running. And I said, how can that be with such a high? This was, 50 years ago. And so I said, well, let's see what it costs you to run at 6-minute mile pace. That's 268 meters per minute. And it cost him this much, about 60 milliliters per kg. That's what it cost him to run at 6-minute mile pace. And it only cost me 51 or 2. to run at 6 minute mile. So I'm more economical than he is. And if I test him at a bunch of speeds and test myself at a bunch of speeds, we each get an economy curve that tells you how economical you are. Just like some cars get 20 miles a gallon, some get 30 miles a gallon. Some are more economical than others. And I just happen to be more economical than this guy. Now, if you extrapolate your economy curve out to your max and drop a vertical line to the horizontal axis, you get, and I named this term that's used internationally now and people define it different ways, but I made it up in the first place. You get what I call a velocity at VO2 max. In other words, what speed of running is associated with your economy and your max? That's what counts. Who cares how big a max you got if you're not economical, or how economical you are if you don't have a max? You got to have this number right there. That's what counts. Because this number right there, you can run at for about 11 minutes. And that's it.
So is economy trainable? And how do you
Oh yeah, both of them are trainable. And people vary just as much in economy as they do in VO2 max. Like I tested a guy who ran 2.9 at Boston with a VO2 max of 70.4. That's a pretty low max for a 209 marathoner, I'll tell you that. But he was the most economical guy, running at 6 minute mile pace. At 6 minute mile pace, this pace right here, he used 43. He was over here. His economy curve was down here. And there was a girl, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. Females are just as economical as males. Males have higher maxes. They really do. They're a little bit bigger hearts and a few cardiovascular things. But that doesn't mean that there aren't women who are better than most men, like Joni, who had a 78.6 VO2 max. That's better than 95% of all the men, but it's not better than the best men. And she ran 221. That's not bad. But she wasn't very economical. She really wasn't. Beautiful as she looks running, and she looks good running. You can't tell economy by looks. In fact, we did that once. We measured a bunch of guys running in the lab, how much it cost them for economy, and we filmed them from the front and the side and the back, and we sent those videos to a bunch of kinesiologists, biomechanists, and coaches and said rank them. They couldn't come anywhere near. You can't look at a person and say that they're economical or not. You got to measure it. You can't look at a person and say what their max is without measuring it. And you can't look at them and say what their economy. Now, obviously there are things that can make your economy bad. And we've done that in tests just to prove it. In other words, run with your hands folded on your hip. You're not as economical as if you swing your arms. Or if you put them in your pocket, you're not as economical as if you swing your arm. So there are things you can do. But if you're trying your very best to do good, some people are just more economical. And we thought that maybe economy was a metabolic thing. That some people, no matter what exercise they did, they were more economical than anybody else. So we did a big study on that. We published it internationally. We took a group of runners. They were runners to start with. We had 13 of them. And we had them run 3 different speeds on the treadmill to measure economy. We had them do 3 different workloads on a cycle ergometer to measure how economical they were biking. We had them walk up 3 different grades, walking up steeper grades to see who was more economical walking uphill. And we had them do a step test, a 30-centimeter step test, to see how economical they were up and down. And we had them do an arm cranking test to see who was most economical with their arms. No correlation at all. None. 0. There wasn't even a positive correlation between doing a step test and walking up a grade on the treadmill. Because when you're doing a step test, you're going up and down. On a treadmill, you're only going up. So some people were more economical coming down or less economical coming down than they were going up. It was amazing. But And these were runners. These were runners to start with. They weren't swimmers or bikers or anything else. And they varied by 22% in running economy. And they didn't vary by that much in anything else. They were more variation in their running economy than any of those other activities. And probably the reason for that is because all the other activities, you didn't have much flexibility in how you performed it. You know, what could you do different when you're cranking? What can you do different walking up a hill? You know, I mean, what can you do different? Whereas running, you can do a lot of things different. So, I tested, well, here's what happens. You can read in the literature probably that women are not as economical as men. But the problem there is that they were testing the women and the men at the same speed. If you're testing a woman at 6-minute mile pace and a man at 6-minute mile pace, the man is more economical. But the woman's working at a higher relative intensity because she doesn't have as high a max. And the higher your relative intensity is, the less your economy gets. Okay? So it's not fair to compare a woman and a man running at the same exact speed. You got to run them. Okay, that's good. First, I'll show you this. These are 3 women I tested. 3 good women. Here's one with a VO2 max of 73. Here's one with a 69, this pink one. And here's one with a VO2 max of only 60. It was 60.4. But look how economical she is. And look how poor the economy of this one was 73. I don't show this to say that everybody with a higher max is less economical. There is a relationship, though. There is a correlation. The higher your max, the less your economy tends to be. We've done research on that. But it doesn't necessitate that a high max means bad economy. It just says there is a correlation there. And here's their velocities at VO2 max for these 3 women. 328, 329, 331. And here's their best 3K time, 908, 907, 904. That tells me that their race time correlates pretty well with their velocity of VO2 max, but not with their economy or their max. No way. Because this girl here with a 60.4, most coaches would say, oh, I'm sorry, dear, I would take up ping pong if I were you. You don't have a high enough max to be a good runner. That's not true at all. This girl was national champion in the 10K one year. Collegiate, not open. So it really varies. I tested a girl one time, a swimmer. Now here, economy becomes even more important because technique is so darn important. This girl was Olympic 400-meter freestyle champion. Her VO2 max was 56. Holy cow, that's like somebody that's just playing darts or something. I mean, you can't go by VO2 max alone. You got to know a little more. And so to answer your question, we came about this number by testing many, many people for economy and VO2 max. And the average economy curve, which is this one right here, which is what we use for VDOT, by the way, is the average economy curve of all of hundreds and hundreds of people we've tested. And so that economy curve, we can apply to everybody. And if we apply that economy curve to everybody and to their max, it will give us a velocity of VO2 max. To increase mileage, I would let an athlete increase their weekly mileage by as many miles as the number of runs they go on each week. If they're running 5 days a week once, they can increase their weekly mileage by 5 miles. If they're running 7 days a week, they can increase their weekly mileage by 7 miles. If they're running twice a day, 7 days a week, I only let them increase 10 miles, not 14. So 10's the maximum. And I make them stay with one amount of running for at least 4 weeks before they go up. And you read this all the time. Increase your weekly mileage by 10% a week. To me, that is one of the dumbest rules I've ever heard. What does that mean? If you did 20 miles this week, next week you can do 22. And the week after that you can do 24.2. And the week after that you can do 26.8 or something. Well, why don't you just stay at 20 for 4 weeks and then go to 30? You know? I mean, it doesn't make sense. You're getting to the same place eventually, but by waiting longer at the same one before going up, you're letting your body adjust to a certain amount of stress before you're changing it. Why should I change the stress my body has to deal with every week? Right. Even if it's only 10%, why should I do that? We're talking about this VDOT business and what Jimmy Gilbert came up with. And basically what a VDOT is a VO2 max that's not done from a lab test. It's done from a race performance. And the only two things you need to know to calculate it are what speed did you run at the race? What speed did you run at the race? In meters per minute. What was your average speed for that race? And once you know what that average speed or that velocity was, you plug it into this formula here, and it gives you a VO2, which is an oxygen consumption cost of that race. And once you have the cost, if you divide the cost by the fraction of max that you worked at, that gives you your max. So there's just two formulas. One was this weird one that gave you what fraction of max is, which is based on the minutes duration of the race. Plug that into those two spots, you get a fraction of max. And you plug the velocity in meters per minute into these two spots, and you get a VO2. Now, a VDOT then equals the cost of the race divided by the fraction of max. So if you had a cost of 58.5 and a VO2 of a fraction of max of 0.9, then the VDOT would be 65. 58.5 divided by 0.9. So you can calculate any VDOT from that. Now, I'm saying that VDOT is a pseudo VO2 max number. It's not a measured one from a lab test, but it represents a VO2 max based on average cost of running and fractions of max. I often have runners or coaches say, well, your VDOT table said I had a 65 VDOT, but I got tested in the lab and I had a 72. And that's okay with me. All that says is you're not as economical as I gave you credit for. Well, really. If you have a higher measured VO2 max in the lab than what I gave you, that just basically says that they used a different value, because I can use the VDOT I came up with to calculate training speeds. And I'll make up for the difference there. I think a VDOT is a way better value to know than a VO2 max test, because it's based on a race rather than what some piece of equipment in the lab said. The lab test says, oh, this is what you should do, but the race says this is what you can do. This is what you do. So I think that the VDOT number is a better number to have than the VO2 max number. Now, there's a benefit. A lot of people say, is there any benefit in having my VO2 max measured? And there certainly is, but for the benefit to be taken advantage of, you probably have to get tested more than once. Right. In other words, if you got tested last week and get tested in another 2 or 3 months, the VO2 max might have gone up, and that says you're improving. See, it still might not agree with the VDOT, but it shows that your VO2 max is going up as a result of training. Here's swimming at sea level. This is interesting. When you go to altitude, it's altitude and sea level. When you go to altitude, let's say you drop 2% at a low altitude in VO2 max, but you only drop 1% in the speed of swimming because of the steepness of this curve. Now, runners, they drop 2% over here in VO2 max, and they also only drop 1% in running because they improve in economy at altitude. Not because of the slope of the curve. For the swimmers, it's a steeper slope. So when you go 1% this way, you go 2% that way. Now, what it says is for swimmers, and this is why it explains why swimmers can swim a longer race closer to their absolute speed than a runner. In other words, a 400-meter freestyle swimmer might break 4 minutes in a 400 freestyle and only swim 52 or 3 seconds in a 100. Whereas a 4-minute runner per mile probably can break 50 easy. So runners lose much more as the distance gets longer relative to their thing. In other words, to go 5% faster, you got to put 10% more into it for swimming, and you only have to put 5% more of it into running. The negative side for the swimmers is that if they want to go 1% faster, they got to put 2% more energy into it. The good news for swimmers is if they slow down or if they back off by 1% in energy, they're slowing down 2% in speed. Or I mean the other way around. 1% in speed and they're saving 2% in energy. Then altitude and sea level. For swim, here's a swimming profile, aerobic profile. Here's a running aerobic profile, and here's a cycling aerobic profile. So if you lose, let's say 10% in VO2 max, you lose 5% the swimmers in speed, you lose 5% in the swimmers or runners for the speed, and the bikers improve. Because they're going so fast that they benefit more at altitude by the reduced air resistance than they lose in the reduced VO2 max. If you're going 30, 40 miles an hour, that speed is a big benefactor at altitude because the air is less dense. In fact, I think the world record on a 1-hour bike ride on a velodrome was done at altitude, I think. So it's interesting to compare sport. And the other sport that I don't have a picture of that's very similar and can benefit from altitude is speed skating. They're going about 25 miles an hour. They're going just about twice as fast as a runner. For a 10K, I think they go, 12, 13 minutes for 10K, I think, something like that. They're hauling. And so they often like altitude. The difference is that ice conditions at altitude are a little different, and I can't remember if they're better or worse, but they're different than sea level. So speed skating is an interesting sport. A good friend of mine that I directed his PhD, and he's studied speed skaters for many, many years. And the most amazing thing was blood lactate levels. You know, when you're working hard as a runner, I've done blood lactates like at the end of a 10K race, and it's maybe 12 or 14 millimoles, and they've done them at the end of marathons, and it was resting value, because when you're going that slow, you're clearing it faster than you're producing it. He told me he had tested 2 guys' blood lactate in speed skating over 30 millimoles. Boy, that's up there. You'd be a hurting unit up there. Because usually 12 and 15, when I test people in the lab on a VO2 max test and get their blood lactate, it's usually around 14, 15, something like that. That's a pretty high number. But over 30 is just unbelievable. Well, and it's because the position they're in when they're skating is stopping blood flow. These muscles are never really relaxed like when you're running in the air, everything loosens up and blood flows. But when you're here all the time, it's going nowhere. They're hurting. And this is just a regular blood lactate profile. I just showed it because that's what you're looking for happening. In other words, you got about 2 millimoles of blood lactate in your blood right now, just sitting here, and you're producing it all the time, and you're clearing it all the time. And so you've got a little in there. And then you start running, and you produce more, but you clear it faster, so it doesn't really go up. And you might run fairly much, quite a bit faster before it starts sneaking up, and then at some point it starts really going. You get to a speed where you can't clear it as fast as you're producing it, so it accumulates. When you're measuring blood lactate, what you're measuring is not production rate, you're measuring accumulation. How much is accumulated? What's the difference between the production and the clearance? And what you want to do is see a curve like this shift to the right, because that means you're at a faster speed before you reach the same level that you used to reach. And that means you've improved your endurance. If you can clear lactate better now than you used to, then your endurance is going to get better. These are some important things that I like to say are basic laws of coaching. And some of them I've gotten white, I think that are of most importance. The others you can just kind of read through. Each runner is an individual. When I coach a team, first day at college, I tell my entire team, you are all individual people, number one. Number two, you are a student at this university. And number three, you are a runner. And don't ever rearrange that order of importance. You're a student before you're a runner when you're in college, and you're a person before you're a student. So keep that straight. Everyone has good days and bad days. I don't care if you're a world record holder or Olympic champion, you can have a bad day now and then. You should have intermediate and long-term goals. And some of the goals, most of the goals aren't time goals or winning goals. Your goal for this race might be, today I'm going to try going out with the leaders and see how well I can hang on. And you might die and run a terrible race, but you accomplish your goal. It's easy to accomplish those kind of goals. Or today I'm going to go out at the back of the pack. And my goal is to pass at least 40 people in this race. That might be my goal, and you might run a good or a bad race still. But you can't always go into every race imagining you're going to win or you're imagining you're going to do that. I always get excited about thinking about most high school runners in cross country. Here's how the race goes. The fastest guy or girl goes out too fast and dies, but wins because everybody else went with them and died worse. Really? No, that's how high school races go in cross country. How are you going to judge that even? The best guy won, and then he assumes that's the way to run the race because he won. I guess the way to run these things is to go out real hard. Drag everybody else with me so they die. I always remember the one year at Cortland when I had the women's team at Nationals, and I'm a fanatic about going out slow in cross-country races. Now, older people can do that. The young high school kids have a hard time because if they go out slow and they look up and see 150 people in front of them, they quit before the race is into the half-mile mark. I had my women, I said, I want you to run the first 484 or 85, no faster. And I measured it off, and they had to do that as part of their warm-up. They had to run it. When the race went off, they went through 84, and they were the last 7 runners in the field of 185. By the mile mark, one of them had the lead, and she won by 20 seconds. And I had 5th, 8th, 15th, and 23rd. They walked off with the team championship. And they were the last 7 runners at the first 400. But if you're going to try that, you've got to practice it in smaller meets before it gets so important. The more important each meet gets, the faster they go out. The same people. The exact same people in a little dual meet will go out too fast. Then it becomes a sectional meet, and they'll go out faster. Then it'll become a regional meet, and it goes out. And then it becomes a national meet, and they go out faster yet. And it's the same people. They just keep going faster and faster. Be available to your most and this is what we've been talking about here, most mistakes are made early in races, particularly a marathon. Go out too fast and you know you're in trouble. And when you run together, I like to say run together. If you got 5 people going out for a run, you don't need a lead dog. And that happens so often. This person's got to be in front. Somebody else comes up to run with him, he picks it up so he stays in front all the time. That's not fun. Even if you have to tell your runners, okay, I want to lead the first mile and you lead the second mile. You've got to do something. You can't have fights going on about who's got to be in the lead. Rest is part of training. It is not avoiding training. You've got to have adequate rest for anything you do. Find positive comments to say. If one of my runners come to me after a race and said, or after a workout and said, man, I felt terrible today, the worst thing I can say is, yeah, and you looked awful too. I mean, come on. Think of something. Maybe you say, I'm sorry you didn't feel good on workout, but you were carrying your arms down a little lower like we've been talking about, and they looked more relaxed, and that was good. Find something good to say. You don't need to back up what their terrible feelings are. Do not train when you're injured or sick. All you're going to do is prolong it. You can't do that. Encourage good food or good nutrition and sleep. Training should always be rewarding. I used to say training should be fun, but it's not always fun. But it should be rewarding. Even if you hurt after a good workout, you ought to be able to think back, yeah, I really benefited today. Consistency is the single most important word in all of life, I guess. Consistency applies to food, consistency applies to rest, consistency applies to training. Anybody can go out and do one great workout and that's it. But to do it with regular consistency, that's what counts. That is really the key to success. Focus on the task at hand. And I'll probably talk more about that than anything else. In fact, I'll tell you a good story about that. When I coached down in Peru, I lived in Lima. They had the national championships in Lima, and one of the kids, who was about an 18, 19-year-old young native kid from up in the mountains, he lived at 13,000 feet up by Lake Titicaca on the Bolivian border. He was running in the 5,000. I'd only been there about 3 or 4 weeks when this took place, and my Spanish was about 0 at that time. And in the 5,000 meter race, this guy was in 5th place with 5 laps to go. And the 4 people who were ahead of him were running as a pack about 60 meters in front of him. And he came by me, I was standing by the finish line, and he said something in Spanish, and I didn't know what he said. And I asked this guy, I said, what did he say? He said he asked if he could drop out of the race. I thought it was nice that he asked instead of just dropping out. So, kind of as a joke, I said, when he comes by with 4 laps to go, you tell him it's just fine with me if he drops out of the race if he first catches the leaders. And he took me at my word. And he went after him. It took him 3 laps to catch him. By the time he caught him, there was less than a lap left. He figured, I might as well win this thing, and he did. He was national champion. Because he had something to focus on. When he came by asking about dropping out, all he was thinking, God, 4 guys are killing me. I'm feeling horrible. I got 5 laps to go. Everything was negative, negative, negative. And I just said, you catch them, you can quit. No problem. That's what he wants to do now. I want to quit this thing, and what do I have to do to get out of this and just catch those guys? And the reason it worked, I'm sure, is because he was from such high altitude, and he didn't know how much better he could run at sea level. He was probably running at his typical altitude pace, and when he tried to pick it up, it was no problem. So you never know. Focus on the task at hand. That's what he did. You focus on the task. People definitely progress at different rates. When I used to coach in college, I would always tell my runners, freshmen coming in, see if you can make a 5 or a 10% improvement over the next 4 years. Maybe you won't make any your first year. Maybe you'll make 5% of your 10% in the first year. But don't think I have to make a certain amount every year. Some people progress very rapidly, and if one of your friends who's equal to you, and you both do training, and your friend gets quite a bit better than you, that doesn't mean they're better. Maybe it's just going to take you longer to get to where he got in a shorter time. People progress at different rates. Know the purpose of every workout. You better know that. And if you don't know the purpose of every workout, I would say go home and watch TV instead of working out. Because why are we doing this? You ought to be able to answer that question. Every workout that's ever done. Why are we doing this workout? What is the benefit of doing this workout? Easy running or long runs. The height of the bar is the intensity of all these, and the length of the bar is how long you could do that type of thing. And I put a limit of 150 minutes on a long run. And I'm sure you've all read, if you want to run a marathon, you got to do some 20-mile runs, or you can't do it. Well, I've been the advising coach advisor for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society for about 17 years, and they have a lot of people who want to finish a marathon. And it's going to take them 6 hours or 7. And somebody told them they got to do some 20-mile training runs before they can do a marathon. Now, if you're going to run that slow, it's going to take you 4 hours to do a 20-mile training run. Now, you ask the top marathoners in the world, do you do 40-mile training? No way. Why should I do that many miles for a marathon? But that's what they would cover in 4 hours. So why in the world should we make a beginner spend more time training than an elite? And you ask the elites, why don't you want to do some 40-mile training? Well, I don't want to get hurt. But it's okay to hurt the beginners, huh? Come on, I don't buy. So I put 150 minutes. That's just my own feeling. 150 minutes. Because that's about as long as any elite marathoner will ever do for a long run. Come on, that's 2.5 hours probably.
What about when you're training for ultras?
Well, you might want to do some longer ones. But, well, let me ask you this. How long of a training run do you think somebody training for a 100-miler would do? 30?
I would say more than 30.
They do them back to back. They do
Yeah.
like 60 and then 20.
Right, yeah, and you might do that. And I encourage some of these beginner marathon people who just want to finish. I say, instead of doing a long run, get in 10 or 12 miles Saturday evening and get up early Sunday and do another 10 or 12. And you, within a 10 or 12 hour period, you've gotten 20 miles in rather than doing it all at once. Because people don't realize it. You can get hurt running easy because you get sloppy the longer you spend out there. Yeah, and I'll often say to these people that say they got to do 20-mile training runs, I say, okay, if you just ran 3 miles a day, that's the longest you ran, and you did that for 3 months, do you think you could complete a 10K? Oh, yeah, no problem. Well, that's 3 times your longest training run. They say, yeah, but a marathon is different. Okay, how about a 100-miler? Most of them probably about 30 miles, about the longest they'll do. That's a third of their distance. So you can do a 100-mile training run or a 100-mile race off of 1/3 the distance as your longest, and you can do a 10K off of 1/3 your distance. But in a marathon, you got to do 75% of your distance in order to complete it. I finally had one girl tell me why you had to do some 20-mile training runs for a marathon, because it's got a 2 in it.
It's mental.
By the way, 12 also has a 2 in it. So anyway, these are my feelings. And I put 150 minutes as the maximum, and I put 30 minutes as the minimum. Well, I mean, once you're used to running, a good friend of mine did some good research on this, aerobic benefits of running. There's the aerobic benefits of a 10-minute daily run. There's the aerobic benefits of a 30-minute daily run. There's the aerobic benefits of a 60-minute daily run. About this much more than 30. So 30 minutes is the maximum benefit for the time spent doing it. So once you're capable of running 30 minutes, I always encourage people, if you're going to go out for a run, get in 30 minutes. Or don't bother. I mean, sure, 10 minutes is better than nothing. But when you start doing runs all the time that are less than 30 minutes, you spend more time showering and changing clothes than you do running. You might as well spend more time running. So, yes?
I'm sorry, are you going to include these slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and what do these easy runs do for you? They increase your heart. I mean, what in the heck can build your heart better than spending an hour out there letting it beat? Easy running strengthens your heart beautifully because you don't feel it. You don't feel your heart hurting when you run, unless you got a heart condition. But a human healthy heart is an unbelievable muscle. And so those two things happen. And you only have to go at about 60 to 75% of your VO2 max, and that's easy. That's conversational. Easy running is conversational. You ought to be able to carry on a regular conversation with a friend in an easy run. You don't have to go any harder than that. And we use that conversational thing when we have altitude athletes. How much slower do I need to train at altitude when I go for? I said, well, run at a speed you can keep talking at. That'd be your easy run. And if it's 10 seconds per mile slower, that's okay. No problem. And then we got marathon training, which really builds your confidence at that speed, and that's about 88 to 88% of VO2 max. And I limit that to about an hour 40. You don't want to run more than about a 15 or 18 mile run at your marathon race pace. That's getting up there. But I wouldn't go much less than 6 or so miles at marathon pace. If you're going to do it, you might as well spend some time doing it. Then threshold running, there's two ways of doing threshold running. One is a steady run of about 20 minutes that we would refer to as a tempo run. Or you could do what I have named cruise intervals, which is that's a word that I stole from swimming about 40 years ago. They use that term, so I thought that sounds good. So you're running at threshold pace for a period of time with a very brief rest and repeating that. Like you might do 5 1-mile runs at threshold pace with 1 minute rest between them. Or you might do 3 2-minute runs with 2 minutes. I give them 2 minutes rest if they're 2 minute long, and 1 minute rest if they're 1 minute long, and 3 minutes rest if they're 3 miles long. So, and I say this percentage here is, I didn't mention, that's about how much of one of these workouts should take up what percentage of your weekly mileage. In other words, I think a long run should take up somewhere between 25 and 30% of your weekly mileage. If you're doing 100 miles a week, 25 is plenty long enough. If you're only doing 30 or so, then maybe 30%. You could do 9 miles for a long run if you're doing 30 miles a week. So I just use that as a gauge when I'm coaching somebody to say your long run should be about this much based on the fact that you're running these many miles a week. And in threshold running, or in marathon pace, about 20% of your weekly mileage, and in threshold running, about 10% of your weekly mileage. So if you're doing 40 miles of running a week, you could do 4 miles worth of threshold running. 4 1-mile runs, or you maybe 2 2-mile runs, or something like that, total. Now, that doesn't mean only that much per week. That means that much per session. So if you had 2 threshold sessions in the same week, they both might be 10% of your weekly mileage. Some people think if I do 2 sessions, then I only do 5% of my week, and one of them and 5. No, that's per session. Yes?
One of the high school coach, so always determining the amount of mileage that an athlete should run. So we developed that number over a number of years, right? The athlete themselves comes up with that number because, again, if you have let's say a junior, now you have a hotshot freshman comes on and wants to do that same mileage, that's where I have my problem with how much mileage does the athlete...
I just have my own rules,
Okay.
No research. To increase mileage, I would let an athlete increase their weekly mileage by as many miles as the number of runs they go on each week. If they're running 5 days a week once, they can increase their weekly mileage by 5 miles. If they're running 7 days a week, they can increase their weekly mileage by 7 miles. Okay. If they're running twice a day, 7 days a week, I only let them increase 10 10 miles, not 14. So 10's the maximum. And I make them stay with one amount of running for at least 4 weeks before they go up. And you read this all the time. Increase your weekly mileage by 10% a week. To me, that is one of the dumbest rules I've ever heard. What does that mean? If you did 20 miles this week, next week you can do 22. And the week after that you can do 24.2. And the week after that you can do 26.8 or something. Well, why don't you just stay at 20 for 4 weeks and then go to 30? You know? I mean, it doesn't make sense. You're getting to the same place eventually, but by waiting longer at the same one before going up, you're letting your body adjust to a certain amount of stress before you're changing it. Why should I change the stress my body has to deal with every week? Right. Even if it's only 10%, why should I do that?
Based on some of the other things you spoke about earlier, if you're changing the quantity or the mileage,
yeah,
you wouldn't change any other factor necessarily?
Probably not. No. Now, yeah.
Why is it that usually people use miles and not time?
Time is great. I'm all for time. It's just most people think in terms of, Americans do. I mean, when you start talking about foreigners, we've got to talk about kilometers. But time is really good, especially for young, slow people. Time is really good. Because, holy cow, if I say I want you to do a 1 hour long run and you only cover 6 miles, that's as much stress on your body as a good runner who covered 10 miles in an hour. And I don't want to tell that other slower person you got to do a 10-mile run. Yeah. I want you to do a 1 hour run. No, I think time is really, really good. And then we get down to, and oh, by the way, on threshold running, if you do a cruise interval workout rather than a steady tempo run, the speed is no faster. It's the same speed. Some people think, well, I get to take a break every mile or so for a minute, I can go faster. No. There's a certain speed associated with threshold running. Regardless of how you break it down, that's the speed you do. And it's just crazy. And you're up about 80, actually the average is about 88% of max. That's where you're working. And then intervals, for my definition of intervals are done at just about 100% of max. And the reason I say 97 to 100% is some people use heart rate. And they say, I got to do my intervals at 100% of my maximum heart rate. How do you know you're not going too fast? If your maximum heart rate is associated with a 5-minute mile and you run 450, is the heart rate going to go up? Nope. Still the same as it was at 5-minute mile. So how do you know you're not going too fast if you're using 100% heart rate? So I say use just under 100%, or right, if you're getting a 97, 98% max heart rate doing this speed, then that's the speed you want. Not a faster one. You don't need to go faster to get 100%. And interval training work bouts do not last longer than 5 minutes per work bout. Now, it could be 1 minute. It could be 30 seconds. They could be 4 minutes or whatever, but the individual work bouts are not to last longer than 5 minutes each. Because remember, you can only race for 11 minutes at that pace. What are you going to do, some 2-mile intervals? You're just racing one after the other. Now, it's not an interval workout. And the ratio of work to rest is about 1 to 1. So for however long you worked for, you get to rest for that long. Maybe a little less. On time, I usually say, if you're doing 4-minute work bouts, you get 3 minutes rest. If you're doing 2-minute work bouts, you get 1 minute rest. If you're doing 5-minute work bouts, you get 4 minutes rest. So it's about a 1 to 1 or a little less rest. Whereas repetition training is a 1 to 2, almost a 1 to 3 ratio. But you don't do work bouts that last more than 2 minutes because you're fast. This is about mile race pace down here. You can't do repeat 4-minute runs at mile race pace. So the recovery is much longer repetitions, and intervals is this intense, and then you can't go by heart rate on repetitions because it's beyond your maximum. You just have to go by the time and the speed. And that will improve economy and speed and anaerobic power. And I limit repetitions to the lesser of 8 kilometers total, or 5% of your weekly mileage. So if you're doing 40 miles a week, you can do 2 miles worth of reps. If you're doing 100 miles a week, you can do 8K worth of reps, because 5% of 100 is more than that. So I like to keep it down. And whether you're doing reps or intervals is a hard, that's where I get into this big problem with this high intensity interval training, because nobody says how fast it's supposed to be. They don't say how, what the number you do and all that. And all I'm saying is you do 8% of your weekly mileage or 10K, whichever comes first. So if you're doing 40 miles a week, you can do 3.2 miles worth of intervals in that session, not per week, but in that session. Now you want to know how much work you can do when you do repetitions. It's unbelievable if you really want to do it. You can go on. It says, let's say that your interval pace is 5 minutes per mile. And you can run 5 or 6 1-mile runs at 5-minute pace. And the purpose is to spend time at your VO2 max. That's the purpose of interval training. When you start the run, it takes about 2 minutes for your VO2 to get up to max. So if you run a 5-minute run at your VO2 max pace, you're going to get 3 minutes at your max. If you did that 5 times, you'd get 15 minutes at your max. The purpose of the workout is to spend time at your VO2 max. What if you ran the first one in 450 because you're all gung-ho and you want to prove that you're better than I think you are? So you run the first one in 450, and there's the cost of 150 up there, or 450. Your VO2 will go up and level off at its max, and you will get 2 minutes at your max by running 450 or running 5 minutes. Doesn't matter. But because you ran the first one in 450, maybe you can handle the second one in 5 minutes, so you got now 10 minutes or 6 minutes at your max. But because the first 2 killed you so badly, you run the next 3 at 510, and here's the cost of 510 down here, and your VO2 goes up and levels off at that cost, and you get 0 time at your VO2 max. So you got 6 minutes at your max by running 5 of those. And you should have got 15 minutes at your max by running 5 of them. If you want to run one faster than the other, make it the last one your fastest, not the first one. Because the first one can ruin the whole workout. And that shows it pretty well. You just can't, you're not working at your max. I don't care how bad you're hurting. You're not working at your VO2 max if you're not running at that speed. You're hurting because you didn't recover from the ones that's too fast. What's setting up a season of training? You do base and into resistance. I like to have 4 phases of training. First phase is base into resistance. Like if you haven't been running at all for the last 2 or 3 months, you're going to run easy for a while. Just like baseball pitchers, spring training, they don't throw 100-mile-an-hour fastball. They throw it easy for a while. You got to build up some resistance to injury and get moving. And then the second phase of training, you start doing your initial quality. And I'm quite different than many coaches. In that phase of training, I like to do repetitions because I like to introduce one new stress. If we go from easy running to repetitions, the only new stress we're increasing is speed. If I go from easy running to interval running, I'm introducing 2 new stresses: speed and aerobic power. And if I go to threshold, the same thing. I'm introducing more than one stress. So and many coaches would rather start easy, then the second phase is a little faster, the third phase is faster, and the last phase is the fastest. I won't argue against that, but I've felt much better doing this. Doing repetitions here, and then in the third phase, I assume that phase is the most stressful one. Because the fourth phase is when you're doing your good races. So you don't want that to be most stressful. You want the one prior to that to be the most stressful. And another way you can look at it is like this. And when I evaluate the 4 phases, I put these numbers down here because I evaluate the first phase first, and I evaluate the last phase second. In other words, if somebody hasn't been running at all, I got to decide what I can have them do to start off. But if they have been running the whole time and they start this, they can work harder down here at 1. So that's the first thing I got to figure out. And the second thing I want to figure out is what kind of running do I want them to be doing when they're racing at their best? Because what that will be will determine what the one before it will be in order to prepare them for that one. And what the one before it will be is determined by the one before that. And I think repetitions here increase your speed and comfort and economy, so when you go here and go to intervals, the speed's not even as fast anymore. It's a completely different stress. That varies so much. And I'm sure if you're a coach in New York State, you don't have more than max maybe 12 weeks of a cross-country season. And so these phases, I would ideally like to have them be 6 weeks long each. But you don't have that much time. But, so I try to, my college runners, I always tell them to get phase 1 and 2 done in the summer. So when school starts, we only got 12 workouts left to do. And if you still don't have that, I put these numbers in here saying if I only had, instead of 24 days, if I only had 23 days, where would I throw one out? I'd throw one out right there. You don't need 5 weeks in that last phase to run well. And if I wanted to throw out 4 of them, I'd throw this out, and I'd throw that out, and I'd throw that one out, and that one out.
Okay.
Now, the ones you want to keep most of are the 2 in the middle. Okay. And here's the repetition phase, and that's got to be done in the summer, I think. Summer is when you get to be a cross-country runner, not during the cross-country season. Right. It's an interesting thing. And here's how some of the coaches around New York asked me, we have a race every Wednesday or every Tuesday and every Saturday of every week. When do we train? So I said, well, if I were you, I'd train on Wednesday. Because that gives you a race Tuesday, train Wednesday, it gives you Thursday and Friday to rest for Saturday's race, it gives you Sunday and Monday to rest for the next Tuesday's race again. And it worked so well for the ones who tried it that I do it now with my college runners. And we don't have a race on Tuesday. But we do back-to-back training. Quality 1, quality 2 on Tuesday, Wednesday, because you still get 2 easy days before the race on the weekend. If you don't have a race, we just do a third quality workout on the Saturday. And we usually do a long run on Sunday to start the week. And that works really, really well. You'd be surprised. One of the big advantages of back-to-back workouts is that it tempers the enthusiasm of the over-stressful people. You tell them, I want you to do 5 1,000s and 320, and they want to do them in 310 or 15. And if you say, oh, and by the way, tomorrow we're going to do 5 times a mile at threshold pace, they're not so likely to kill Tuesday anymore. And if you want to look at another benefit of back-to-back workouts, when you get to track season, you do have meets where you run Friday, Saturday. Right. Prelims and finals. You're used to doing it. Intervals, if there's no race Tuesday, with my team, my college, they don't have a Tuesday race. I do intervals here and threshold the next day. And get in the habit of when you do a threshold run, finish it with about 4 200s at rep pace. So you're maintaining the benefits you gained in repetition training in the previous phase. You don't want to throw them out completely. What I would do, maybe two quality workouts a week, and I would do them like Tuesday, Friday, or if a weekend has to be one of them, then do them on one of the weekend days and then one other weekday days.
Do you consider long runs quality runs? Or
I consider long runs a quality run. So some people can just do 2 quality, including a long run, which means 1 faster workout. Some people can do the long one and still 2 quality. And if you do that, I would try the long run on Sunday and maybe Tuesday, Friday for the. Well, the reason here is most people have their own schedule on the. It's easier for school kids, particularly college, to go out and run when they want on Sunday. Some of them want to run at 6 in the morning, some want to run at 2 in the afternoon, and I'm not going to meet them and all go together.
So it doesn't matter whether it's at the end or the...
No. Nope.